Monday, the 31st of October 2022. In this Skidmark, I am going to try and give a little bit of background about the special military operation in Ukraine. Many of us are listening to things about Ukraine and so, but it is difficult to get an overview of what exactly is happening there. And that has led to a situation that it has been distilled down for the two sides. Either you support Ukraine or you support Russia. But you don't really know exactly why you're doing it and what is happening there and what is going on. Because the information that we get is mostly highlighted to be interesting. But there is deep, dark background to this whole conflict that is not talked about, and a lot of people ignore it, and a lot of people are totally unaware of it. And all we see is the Russians fighting against the Ukraine soldiers, which is not correct, because that is not really what's going on there. And I'm going to show you this map of Ukraine, and you must look at all those red dots there. And let's start at the top right hand corner. There is Kharkiv, which is still under control of the Ukrainians, but the surroundings of Kharkiv is already a battlefield, and that was also there where the Ukrainians made a big song and dance of their counter-attack and counter-offensive, and where they claimed to have driven the Russians back. But the Russians were moving back. If you can see the white line is there for the Lugansk Republic, and just a little bit towards Kharkiv, there's a river there. The Russians have fallen back to the eastern bank of that river. They pulled back there because they didn't have enough soldiers to protect that whole area. And then the Ukrainians and the Western press made a big song and dance of the area that Ukraine gained, but as someone has said, it was grass fields, pastures for horses and cows that they took, with there's very little population there and only a few small villages. So they got the villages, and now what? And then you move further right to almost the edge of the screen. That is Lugansk city. And then you move a little bit down, and then you get to Donetsk city. And then you move right down towards the sea there, and you get Mariupol. And then on the left of that, there's Zaporizhzhia, where that big nuclear plant is. And then you move a bit further down along that river, and you get to Kherson, and we all know about Kherson, and we know that there's a lot of fighting going on there. And then more to the left of Kherson, there is Mykolaiv, and we know that there's action at Mykolaiv itself. And then you move a little bit further left, and you see there's Odessa, and at the bottom you see there is this, it's on the Crimean Peninsula, and the Sevastopol city and harbor and naval bases there. Now, if you look at that, those are the hotpoints that we all are aware of, that there is action. And then you look at this map. On this map I overlaid for you some colors. The red, the light red on the left hand side, is the areas that are now under control of the Russians, and it has also been included in Russia now. And then on the right, left hand side, you see that little red strip there next to Moldova. That is Transnistria. And then I've colored that big area there in yellow, a light yellow overlay. Now, those are the areas that, in my mind, in my opinion, the Russians are going to take. There will be no serious negotiations with Kiev on peace before those areas are not under Russian control. The Russians must take that. They cannot afford not to take it. The main objective is to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea, and secondly, they need to get connected to the people in Transnistria, because there are rumors that Romania is going to filter through Moldova and try to take Transnistria, and that will be a balls up for Russia. And then you look at this map. On this map I've drawn a yellow line. That bright yellow line is roughly the front on which the battles are going on. Now, for just to get some clarity, that is roughly about 1,700 kilometers. And for the South Africans, that is about as far as from Nelspruit to Cape Town. That's a hell of a distance. And that is the front on which they are fighting. And the initial force that the Russians pushed into Ukraine was only 150,000 people, of which almost 100,000 is employed in logistics and peacekeeping, basically, and administration. So 50,000 Russians. There was no way that they could fight on that whole front. And that is one of the reasons why the mobilization was done. And now I'm going to talk about something that very few people are aware of. In the deep, dark dungeons in Washington is a group of crazy lunatics that has this plan. Look at that map. It's Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. That block is referred to as anti-Russia. Plan was to form a federation there of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries. And that federation would cut Europe off from Russia completely. And that will have two results. First of all, it will destroy the European industries and most of their economy. Secondly, it will cut Russia off. Although Russia has got all these raw materials and natural resources, it will cut Russia off from European technology, specifically technology from Germany, Switzerland and Austria. This is their goal. And if you go and you look at what is happening today, you will see that the Poles and the Ukrainians has already changed laws so that Polish professionals can work in the Ukraine without any problems, and they will also qualify for Ukrainian social services. So those two are already putting laws into place to make a merger possible. And then if you look at what's happening in Latvia, they are already also busy changing a lot of laws to achieve this. And who are the drivers behind this here? It's a sector in the Yukon tribe in Washington that is behind this grand plan, and the British. Washington and the British are involved in this plan. And I don't think, if this should ever happen, that it will be good for either Russia or Europe. And at this point in time, it's only the Russians that are fighting this. It's only the Russians that are fighting this. In the meantime, the whole of old Europe is at stake. Because there was a plan at a stage. I can't remember who was the main architect of it, but they wanted to create an economic bloc from Lisbon into Russia, and that would be a hell of a powerful Eurasian bloc. That would be a massive force in the global system. And those operators in Washington and in London did everything they could to derail that plan. And now that plan is out of the door. So the Russians are fighting to prevent this anti-Russia federation to be formed and include Ukraine. That is why they are down the east side, already taken a lot, and they're going to move in up to Transnistria and Belarus. Don't forget Belarus there. Belarus, there's a lot of Russian soldiers already mobilized in Belarus, plus the Belarusian army is mobilized, and they are sitting there on the borders of Ukraine, ready to move, because for Russia to derail this anti-Russia plan, they have to cut Ukraine totally off from the West, so that the West cannot supply Ukraine, and that means that the western side of Ukraine will have to be taken. Now the Russians don't have much interest in that western side, and the Poles has made it clear that they want that, but the Russians will not allow that. I have a suspicion it will be a combination of Belarusian and Russian soldiers that are going to move into that western side of Ukraine to isolate Ukraine totally, because there's no way that the Russians is going to allow the Ukraine to have access to the Black Sea. They're going to cut that off, for sure. We saw it over the weekend with that attack on Sevastopol, and that attack was launched from Odessa. So that is over. And I'm going to show you something else. Look at this map. There in the left-hand quadrant, there is Chernobyl. Now, if you remember and think back, right in the beginning of the operation, within the first week, the Russians took Chernobyl. And the Ukrainians then cut the power to Chernobyl. So the cooling operations could not be maintained, and Belarus supplied power to Chernobyl. But Chernobyl is under control of the Russians. I wondered why. And then I read a document, and I want to discuss that document, but I'm not going to do it in this one because it's going to be too long. But there at Chernobyl was where the Ukrainians were working on a dirty bomb. So the Russians went in, took control of Chernobyl, and removed all that material and took it into Russia. And it was also in this area of Chernobyl. It's very, very, very isolated countryside. There was quite a few biolabs in that vicinity also that was taken by. And then we get to this. I want you to take a good look at it. There in the middle at the top is Chernobyl, and you can see Kiev city, and then just to the left of Kiev, there's a place called Gostomel. And next to Gostomel is that place that I'm not allowed to call the name because that will get me in trouble on YouTube, but it starts with a B, and that was the first place that the Ukrainians and the West made a hell of a story about the atrocities that happened there, and we all know now that. But Gostomel, take note of Gostomel, because I couldn't understand why did the Russian forces move down towards Kiev and then they got stuck there for weeks. They didn't do anything. But then I read in that document that I will discuss later that the Russian airborne forces took Gostomel. And why did they take it? I'm going to show you an aerial photograph. You'll see it's an airfield, and there is, look at that big hangar on the middle right, that big hangar. And what is in that hangar? This thing. That is that aeroplane's house. It was this aeroplane's house. This is called I don't know how to say that word, pronounce that word, but it's Maria. That's apparently the name they gave that airplane. When I saw these images, this is inside the hangar of that plane, and this is the hangar of that. When I saw these images, I was a little bit disgusted, and I thought to myself, that's the biggest freight airliner in the world. Why the hell did they destroy it? I couldn't understand why they destroyed it. And then in that document that I will talk about later in a next program, if there are interest in it, Guy explains that that plane, they were busy outfitting that plane to carry a dirty bomb. That's what they planned. And they were busy installing it into that plane. And that was the reason why the Russians destroyed that plane. They took all the elements out that they needed and then they destroyed the plane. Now, we don't hear about things like that. We don't hear about it. So, it looked to us like the Russians were fucking around there in Ukraine, there in front of Kiev for certain reasons, for which we didn't know why, as if they were stuck and they were without a plane or what. But in the meantime, those forces that were moving down and was there in front of Kiev, they were there to provide backup to the forces that were taking Gossamer and destroying that airplane and taking that dirty bomb elements and components out. And that force there at Kiev, they were taking these soldiers out after this destruction was done. Now, why? What was the plan with that dirty bomb? And if you look at this map, see that red blotch there? That is in the area of Rostov-on-Don, Donetsk, and the bottom part of Lugansk. And that is known as the Black Earth area. That is the area where most of the Russian wheat is produced. And the plan was, with that hell of a force that Kiev was building up in the Donbass, for them to overrun Lugansk and Donetsk and hit the Russian border. And that would have taken them, apparently, according to that document, it would have taken them 2 to 3 days and they would be on the Russian border. And then the Russians, and they would be fighting the Russians on a Russian soil. But the plan with the bomb was to explode it here where this red blot is, to poison that soil and render it useless for 30, 40, 50 years. Why? To destroy Russia's big asset in food production, so that they will lose that leverage on the world. Because at this point in time, Russia is providing bread to the bulk of the Earth's population. And that was a plan. And when I read that document, I was deeply disturbed. And I thought to myself, this is our problem. We are unaware of the dark forces that work at the back. Because whenever you say something like this that sounds too good to be true, or it sounds far-fetched or what, you are immediately branded as a conspiracy theorist. And that is not the case. That's the reality, because if you see how the things are unfolding, it all follows that route. Now, it looks like the Russians has taken that opportunity for the dirty bomb off the table. Why do you think the Ukrainians were so desperate to get their hands on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant? They were after that uranium in there for that dirty bomb. After the Russians took Chernobyl, they lost their access to that. And their next hope was Zaporizhzhia, but Zaporizhzhia was firmly under control of the Russians. And then there's something else that you have to keep in mind about Kherson. At Kherson is a massive dam, and from Kherson, from that dam, is a major, hell of a canal that moves water from the Kherson Dam into Crimea. And that the Ukrainians also cut off 8 years ago already. So right in the beginning of the hostilities, it was in a flash, and the Russians had that Kherson and Kherson Dam under their control. They had Zaporizhzhia under their control. They had Chernobyl under their control. And they destroyed that big airplane at Kostanel, at that airfield. So I think it's the Antonov airfield. So those are things that we don't see and we don't hear, and the news media don't talk about it. And all of this is driven, is that plan to form that anti-Russia federation to separate Europe from Russia, in the process destroying the European economy and industry, and cut Russia off from European technology. But I think the plan makers did not keep in mind or ever imagined how China and India is going to move into this playing field. And that big plan of theirs is now struggling, and it is in pieces. Now I hope that this gives you a little bit more of a background of what the hell is going on in the Ukraine and why are the Russians fighting where they are fighting. And I'm still thinking whether I want to publish that document. I've got it now for about 2 weeks, and what is amazing to me is how many of the things that the guy is talking about in that document is now happening. So the puzzle pieces are getting together, but I will think about that document. And on that, please give a like, subscribe, and share the thing. Thank you.